My name is Dana Whitmore, and the moment I stepped into my son's empty bedroom, I felt something in me split down the middle. There was no blood, no glass broken, no door slammed, just silence. And the cruel, undeniable stillness of a bed that hadn't been slept in. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to hear this story, because sometimes the ones we think we've lost are the ones who are finally trying to find themselves. It started like any other morning. Coffee brewing. My inbox full. I padded down the hallway in slippers, knocked on Liam's door like I always did, expecting to hear a grunt or groan in response. But there was nothing. I knocked again. Liam. Still nothing. When I opened the door and saw the bed made a part of me, the calm, rational part tried to reassure myself. Maybe he left early. Maybe he had a study group. But then I noticed the little things. His favorite hoodie wasn't on the hook. His sneakers weren't by the door. And his phone, the phone I'd practically had to pry out of his hands at dinner, was still charging on his nightstand. That's when my heart dropped. Because kids don't leave their phones behind by accident. I checked the front door. Locked. Back door. Still latched. Garage empty. I called his name again, this time louder. Still no answer. I texted him. Where are you? The message delivered, but it never turned blue. Never said read. At first I tried to stay composed. I called the school. They hadn't seen him. I called his best friend, Zach. No answer. His ex-girlfriend. Shrugged it off, said she hadn't heard from him in weeks. Sounded annoyed I'd even asked. Then I called my sister. Maybe he just needed space, she said gently. You two have been butting heads a lot lately, right? I didn't want to admit she was right. Our home had felt like a war zone lately, not explosive, but brittle. Like one wrong sentence could send the whole place crashing down. Still, this wasn't just a slammed door or a sleepover lie. Something in my gut was screaming, this isn't a rebellion. This is a goodbye. I went back into his room and looked around slower this time. His drawers were messy but not chaotic. Some clothes were missing. His laptop was gone. The framed photo of us from 3 summers ago, the one from the lake, had been removed. The dust outline still clung to the shelf like a shadow. He planned this. I opened his closet. There it was, a duffel bag, empty hanger straps swinging in the dark like silent accusations. And then I found it, his school ID snapped in half and tossed into the trash. Not lost. Left behind. Intentionally. By noon, I was at the police station. They were kind. Routine. Has he run away before? No. Does he have a history of violence? No. Any notes? Threats? Just silence. My answers felt thinner than the form I filled out. The officer glanced at me, trying to sound calm. He's 17, ma'am. He's just old enough to think he knows everything and just young enough to believe the world won't hit back. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of his room with the lights off, knees pulled to my chest like a child, listening to the house breathe around me. It was the kind of silence that turns into noise the longer you sit in it. Memories came like flash floods. Him learning to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac. Late-night movies after his dad left. Our last argument where I told him he was being selfish and immature. The way he looked at me like I'd just kicked him in the chest. I kept replaying that look. That's what haunted me most. Because I think that was the moment he decided he had to go. That I wasn't a safe place anymore. By the 3rd day, the flyers were up. The calls were out. His friends had all been questioned. No one knew anything. Or maybe they did but didn't want to snitch. The police did what they could. But I could feel it, the quiet shift in tone. The unspoken message: this might take a while. They didn't say it out loud, but I heard it between every word: you're going to have to go through hell to find him. And I would. Even if I had to walk through fire barefoot to do it. The thing about finding a clue is it doesn't give you peace. It gives you questions. And in my case, it gave me confirmation Liam hadn't just left. He'd prepared for it. The officer's advice echoed in my mind. Go through his room one more time. You'd be surprised what kids leave behind when they're rushing. But this wasn't rushed. That was the worst part. This was surgical. Thought out. Like someone packing for exile. I stepped into his room with new eyes like I was entering the scene of a crime. The sunlight through the blinds cast slanted lines on the carpet, illuminating dust motes and outlines where his things used to be. Shadows had settled where his laughter once was. I started with the obvious. Drawers, shelves, under the bed. The usual chaos of a teenager's room: gum wrappers, broken pens, old assignments. But under that mess was a kind of order, a purpose. And I felt more like an archaeologist than a mother as I moved through it all. I opened his closet, shoved aside a stack of clothes he hadn't worn in months, and then I saw it, a second backpack. Hidden. Heavy. I pulled it out like it might explode. Dust coated the straps. The zipper stuck halfway. When I opened it, I froze. Inside were the bare essentials of survival. 2 folded shirts and 1 pair of jeans. A flashlight with spare batteries. A pack of protein bars. A small familiar notebook, one of mine in fact. $140 in loose bills. And a laminated city bus schedule, worn and soft at the creases. He hadn't just run, he'd rehearsed. I sat down hard on the bed. The springs creaked under my weight, an ugly sound in the silence. I turned the notebook over in my hands. It had my handwriting on the first few pages, grocery lists, phone numbers, but then his took over. Page after page of lists. Plans, options, places to sleep, library stairwell, Ellis Center, Zach's old shed jobs, no ID busboy flyer, handouts, dish pit, avoid cameras downtown, blend, stay small, don't draw heat. I could hardly breathe. Each line felt like a dagger. And then I read, don't be like Dad. Don't run and get stuck. Run and change. That broke me. I'd spent so long blaming myself for the divorce, for how his father vanished into silence. But now I was staring at the consequences, not just in my son's pain, but in his belief that the only way forward was away from everything. The bus schedule was the last piece. Tuesday, 6:15 a.m. That was the morning I found his bed cold. My fingers gripped the edges like it was a life raft. Line 4, downtown. That's what it read. I grabbed my coat, keys, and purse and drove to the station like my body wasn't my own. The depot was half empty when I arrived, a stale smell of coffee oil and plastic seat cushions in the air. The hum of tired conversations and incoming buses surrounded me. I marched straight to the counter. The man behind the glass looked up slowly, middle-aged, unshaven eyes heavy with too many years of apathy. I'm looking for my son, I said, holding up the photo. 17. Hoodie. About this tall. He stared for a second too long. I saw him, he finally muttered. Tuesday morning. Paid in cash. Hoodie up. Sat in the back. Do you remember which bus? Line 4. Headed to downtown. I don't remember thanking him. I remember barely being able to stand. Downtown. The place I told Liam never to go alone. The place where he went anyway. The drive into the city was a fog. Buildings blurred together. Street signs became meaningless symbols. I passed the museum we used to visit, the sandwich shop where he'd beg for extra chips. I parked 3 blocks from the final stop, stepped out, and was immediately overwhelmed. People swarmed past me, professionals, students, the homeless, the lost. My senses overloaded: the metallic squeal of train brakes, the smell of rain on concrete, a man shouting something about salvation across the street. I moved like a ghost, scanning every crowd, peering into every alleyway, hoping for a glimpse of a hoodie, a shoulder, a boy too young to be alone. Nothing. I sank onto a bench near a trash-stained flower bed and pulled out the notebook again. Pages fluttered in the wind like they were trying to get away too. Then I saw it scribbled in blue ink at the edge of one page, Cafe Cora Ask Girl WA. Pink braid, it was barely legible, but it was a thread. I stood up and pulled out my phone. Cafe Cora, zero point 0.4 miles away. I walked faster than I thought I could. The sidewalks blurred. Storefronts passed like streaks of color. I didn't stop until I reached a tiny cafe wedged between a thrift shop and a closed hardware store. Cafe Cora. There was a warm buzz inside jazz music, clinking cups, faint cinnamon in the air. I stepped in and scanned the room. Then I saw her, a young woman behind the counter with a long pink braid and septum-piercing cleaning mugs and swaying to the music. I approached, hard in my throat. "Excuse me, do you know this boy I held up the photo?" She looked at it. Blinked. "Yeah," she said slowly. "He came in Tuesday. Asked about dish shifts. Seemed real polite." My throat tightened. "Do you know where he went?" She hesitated. Looked at me with guarded eyes. "Are you his mom?" I nodded, trying not to cry. She sighed. "He mentioned Ellis Shelter. Said he was thinking of checking it out." "I don't know if he did." "Did he seem okay?" Her eyes softened. "Tired. Real quiet. Kept holding that notebook like it was all he had." That's when the tears came. Not sobs, just silent, uncontrollable rivers down my cheeks. I whispered thank you and turned before she could see the full collapse. Outside, I leaned against the wall and clutched the notebook to my chest. He wasn't gone. He was just trying to survive the only way he knew how. But beneath that one thought burned into my mind. He planned this escape like someone who didn't trust me to come looking. And maybe he had every reason not to. When you're waiting for a phone call from your child, time warps. Minutes don't just tick by, they bleed. And when the phone stays silent for days, it starts to feel like the silence is personal, like it's punishment. After finding the note about Cafe Cora, I had hope. Hope was dangerous. It kept me moving, but it also meant every moment without his voice felt like a slap. Because in my mind, he should have called. He knew I'd be worried. He had to know. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking. He just needs space. He's figuring things out. He'll call when he's ready. But another voice, the one that sounded like the worst version of myself, whispered back, "What if he doesn't want to?" That night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone like it was a bomb about to go off. It didn't. The living room was dark. The only light came from under the fridge and the little LED ring on the router. I kept refreshing my messages. Kept rechecking the same thread with his name. Still gray. Not delivered. Not read. I thought about calling him. Again. But I didn't want to scare him off. Didn't want to seem controlling or pushy. So instead, I did something that felt even worse. I sat there and waited. Like a dog at a door that might never open. The house was too quiet. Every clock tick felt like judgment. And with nothing left to do, my mind went back again to our last big argument. It was 2 weeks before he left. We were in the kitchen and I had just gotten back from work. Tired, cranky, behind on deadlines. He'd failed a math quiz again, and when I asked about it, he rolled his eyes. I don't even remember what I said, something sharp, something sarcastic. But I do remember what he said. "Why do you only talk to me when you're mad?" I snapped. Said something about responsibility, about him not appreciating how hard I worked, about how I didn't have time to coddle him. And he just stood there, staring. His face didn't twist in anger. It didn't even flinch. It just fell. Quiet. Heavy. Like a curtain coming down. He turned and walked out. I let him. That look haunted me now, because I realized what he really meant. He wasn't saying I was mean. He was saying he felt invisible. The next morning, I called the Ellis Youth Shelter. A tired-sounding woman picked up. "Hi, my name is Dana Whitmore. I think my son may have come to your shelter in the past few days. His name is Liam, 17. Brown hair, tall, kind of quiet. She cut me off gently. I'm sorry, ma'am. We can't confirm names over the phone, for their protection. My chest caved. I understand. I'm his mom. I need to know if he's safe. She softened. Why don't you come by? We're open 10 to 6. I drove over that afternoon. The shelter was a small converted brick church on a side street I'd never noticed before. Inside it smelled like cheap coffee and bleach. There were kids on couches, some asleep, some scrolling phones. The woman from the phone, her name tag said Tara, met me at the front desk. I still can't give names, she said quietly, but I can tell you this. A boy matching your description came in. Didn't stay. Just asked questions. About jobs, about food. Said he was doing fine. Said he wasn't ready to go home. I nodded, tears already welling. Did he look okay? Tara smiled faintly. Tired, but polite. He said he wasn't homeless. Just on pause. That's how he phrased it. On pause. Like his life was a video he could rewind if he changed his mind. Or like I was the part he was trying to skip. Before I left, Tara handed me something. I probably shouldn't, she whispered, but he left this behind. Didn't mean to, I think. It was a folded page from the notebook. His handwriting. A draft of a text message. I'm okay. You don't need to freak out. I just couldn't breathe anymore. I don't hate you, Mom. I just needed you to listen. And you didn't. No date. No name. But I knew it was for me. He'd never sent it. I stood outside the shelter for almost an hour after that, holding that piece of paper, holding my breath, trying to understand how I'd missed so much in someone I'd raised. That night, I didn't wait by the phone. I didn't scroll through old photos. I didn't read through parenting blogs for advice. Instead, I wrote a letter to him. Liam, I don't know where you are right now, or if you even want to be found. But I hope somehow you know this. I'm not mad. I'm not hunting you down to drag you back. I'm here because I love you, and because not knowing if you're safe is killing me. I've made mistakes. I know that. Maybe more than I even realize. I want to fix that, not because I expect you to come back, but because you deserve a mom who sees you. I see you now. I hope I get to tell you that to your face someday. I folded the letter, sealed it, and left it in my purse. Not because I had somewhere to send it, but because part of me believed that maybe he'd feel it like a flare shot into the sky, and maybe, one day, he'd send one back. It started with a crumpled piece of paper wedged between Liam's dresser and the wall. I dropped my keys by accident and knelt to pick them up when I noticed it. Yellowed at the edges, nearly torn in half. A receipt. From a gas station 3 towns over. Timestamp 2 days before he disappeared. It didn't make sense. Liam didn't drive. He didn't even like riding in cars. And this wasn't from the mini-mart up the street. It was from a place I hadn't even known he'd been near. I turned it over. The items: 1 large water bottle, 2 granola bars, a disposable lighter, a city map. My breath caught. This wasn't a snack run. It was preparation. And suddenly the picture became sharper. He hadn't just decided to leave, he'd practiced. I drove to the gas station that same afternoon. It sat at the edge of a cracked highway, the kind of place truckers passed through without looking twice. I walked inside. It smelled like motor oil, gum, and cigarettes. A bored teenager stood behind the counter, scrolling his phone. He didn't look up until I reached him. Hi, I said, holding up my son's picture. I'm looking for someone. He might have come here a few days ago. 17, brown hair. Tall. Hoodie. He squinted. Maybe. We get a lot of kids. I nodded. Do you have security footage? He laughed. Lady, this place barely has working Wi-Fi. Just as I was about to turn and leave, an older man stepped out from the back. Oil-stained shirt. Graying beard. You said you're looking for a kid in a hoodie, he asked. I nodded again, hopeful. Yeah, I remember him. Polite. Paid in cash. Asked about the map rack. I leaned in. Did he say where he was going? He shrugged. Nah. Just said he needed to get to the city without being noticed. That line haunted me on the drive back. Without being noticed. That wasn't a teen's rebellion. That was a survival instinct. That was a kid trying to disappear. I pulled over at a rest stop and stared at the steering wheel. For a long time, I just sat there. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out his notebook again. I turned to a page I hadn't noticed before. Drawn in pencil was a rough diagram, circles connected by arrows, question marks, and scribbled notes. Old train lot still fenced off. Underpass near creek hidden. Meet ask Kelsey. I circled the last part with my finger. Kelsey. A name I hadn't heard in over a year. Kelsey was his old friend from middle school. They'd been inseparable for a while until her family moved across town. They fell out of touch. Or so I thought. I found her mom's number in an old PTA thread and called. Hi, this is Dana Liam's mom. I know it's been a while, but I think he may have been in touch with Kelsey recently. Has she said anything? Her mom hesitated. Actually, yeah, she mentioned he reached out. Just a few texts. Said he was okay but needed space. I didn't think much of it. My voice cracked. Could I talk to her? There was a pause. Then, of course. Kelsey sounded older than I remembered. More guarded. He said not to tell you, she said flatly. I know, I replied. But I'm not trying to drag him home. I just want to make sure he's okay. She was quiet for a long moment. He asked me if I still knew how to get into the old train lot by campus. I said probably, but that it was dangerous. That's all he wanted. The old train lot. Of course. Abandoned for years. Rusted cars, graffiti-covered walls, and quiet. I hadn't thought about it since he was little and used to press his nose to the car window as we drove past it. By the time I reached the lot, the sun was just beginning to set. Long shadows stretched over the cracked pavement. The gate had a small section pried open just big enough for someone Liam's size to squeeze through. I stood at the edge for a moment, afraid. Not because of what I might find, but because of what I might not. I walked the perimeter, shouted his name once. Nothing. Just birds in the rafters and the sound of wind through broken glass. But then, under one of the old rail cars, I saw something, a candy wrapper. The kind he liked. And beside it, a folded jacket. His. I dropped to my knees, heart racing. He'd been here, maybe hours ago, maybe longer. But he'd rested here, slept here, hid here. I ran my hands over the gravel as if touching the space he'd occupied would somehow tether me to him. I didn't find him that night. But I didn't leave empty-handed either. Because now I knew how he was thinking. He was circling safe spots, testing hideouts, leaving whispers of himself behind. Breadcrumbs. He wasn't trying to vanish forever. He was trying to make me prove I was willing to follow. There's a moment when your fear of the unknown becomes smaller than your fear of doing nothing. That's where I was. Sitting in my car outside the abandoned train lot watching the city skyline shimmer in the distance, I realized something heartbreaking. I didn't really know who Liam had become. I knew the boy who built Lego towers on my living room rug, the one who begged me to read Where the Wild Things Are 3 times a night. But the boy who planned his escape with cache maps and backup hiding spots, I'd never met that version of him. So I drove into the city. It was almost dusk, and the traffic into downtown crawled like molasses. I didn't care. I took every red light as penance. As I crossed into the city proper, the skyline became overwhelming. So many glass towers, glowing signs, waves of people. It was everything Liam didn't grow up around, crowded, loud, unpredictable. I tried to picture him here, navigating bus routes, asking strangers for help, avoiding the kinds of people no teenage boy should ever have to face alone. I started with the areas mentioned in his notebook. The Union Transit Center, the old underpass, the Mission House shelter. Each place held a whisper of him like I was walking through an echo, but I never caught sight of him. At the shelter, the woman at the front desk looked at me with kind but tired eyes. "We don't keep anyone against their will. If he came through, he left fast." "How fast?" I asked. She shrugged. "Some kids stay a night. Some stay 10 minutes. Your son? I think he was looking for answers, not a bed." That line stuck with me. Looking for answers. It sounded like something Liam would do. Always searching. Always quiet in the ways that mattered. I wandered deeper into the city toward the back streets where tourists don't go. I checked corners and alleys, peeked into cafes, watched benches like they were stages waiting for him to appear. Finally, I stopped at a soup kitchen I remembered from volunteer work years ago. It was run down now. The outside looked the same, peeling paint, rusted handrail. But inside, I found warmth. Clatter of trays, laughter from the kitchen, and kids, dozens of them, sitting with plastic bowls and stolen glances of embarrassment. I held up Liam's photo again. It felt like a ritual at this point. A man in a red beanie pointed. "Could be. He was here yesterday. Asked if we needed help washing dishes. Didn't talk much. Do you know where he went? South side, I think. Something about trying to find a guy named Milo." I thanked him and left, adrenaline fighting with exhaustion. Milo. No idea who that was. But at least it was something. It was full night by the time I found myself on a side street near an old youth co-op. Graffiti painted the bricks. Someone had drawn a phoenix across the whole wall, rising from flames, its wings like stained glass. I stood staring at it for a long time, and then from behind me I heard a familiar sound. Laughter. Not the light, boyish laugh I remembered, but a deeper, more guarded one. And still unmistakably his. I turned. And there he was. Liam stood under a flickering streetlight talking to a kid with a skateboard. He had the same hoodie, the same slouch in his shoulders. But he looked older, somehow, thinner, more angular. Like the city had aged him. He saw me. And froze. The other kid looked between us and backed away slowly. "Liam," I whispered. He didn't run, but he didn't come closer either. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was low, flat, defensive. I know I said breathless, but I had to try. "I told Kelsey not to say anything." "She didn't," I guessed. "Your notebook." He cut me off. "You read it, I had to." "No," he snapped. "You chose to." That stung, because he was right. I chose to invade his space, chose to pursue him, chose to step into his new world, one he built without me. But I had no defense. Only truth. "I didn't come to drag you home," I said. "I just needed to see you, to know you were alive." He watched me for a long moment. His eyes weren't angry. They were tired. "Why now?" he asked. "Why suddenly care so much that one hurt deeper?" I tried to steady my voice. "I've always cared. But I haven't always shown it in ways that made you feel safe. And for that, I am so sorry." The silence between us stretched. I saw his jaw tighten. He looked down at his shoes, then back at me. "You said I was dramatic. When I told you I felt alone?" I nodded slowly. "I remember. You made me feel like I was wrong for feeling that way." "I know," I whispered. He shook his head, shoved his hands in his pockets. "I didn't leave to punish you," he said finally. "I left because being home felt like I couldn't breathe. Every hallway felt like I didn't belong. That did it." The dam broke. Tears ran down my face before I could stop them. "I failed you," I said. He didn't respond, just stared. Then finally he nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "You did." I stepped back, giving him space, letting him decide what came next. "Do you want me to go?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, not yet. That was the beginning. Not of forgiveness, not of reunion, but of acknowledgement. Of seeing each other again, not just as mother and son, but as two people who had hurt and survived, separately. And now, maybe together. The next morning, Liam was gone again. Not in the same way as before, not vanished, not erased, but gone nonetheless. I'd slept in my car parked 2 blocks from the co-op where I last saw him. I don't even remember drifting off. The exhaustion must have finally caught up to me. But when I woke, the streets were alive with early delivery trucks and kids heading to school, and Liam was nowhere in sight. I walked the block twice, scanned every corner, checked the skate shop across from the mural. Nothing. No hoodie. No familiar slouch. My stomach knotted, but this time it wasn't panic. It was acceptance. He was moving, not running, and maybe that was the best I could hope for right now. I bought a coffee from a food cart and sat down near the painted phoenix mural again. The wind had picked up, and with every gust that bird seemed to ripple like it might actually take flight. I was halfway through my cup when someone sat down beside me. "You're Liam's mom?" I turned. A girl maybe 16, maybe 20. Short-shaved hair, dyed silver, dark hoodie, chipped nail polish, and the kind of guarded look that made me instantly alert. "I am," I said carefully. "Do you know where he is?" She shrugged. "Not today, but I saw you two talking last night." I studied her. "Friend of his." Another shrug. "Kind of. I'm Jenna. He calls me Bird, though. Says I remind him of some character from a book." That sounded like him. She lit a cigarette, offered me one. I shook my head. "You don't look like I expected," she said. I figured uptight. Or fake. "But you just look tired." "I am," I said honestly. "Cool. Honesty's rare." We sat in silence for a beat. A car alarm went off in the distance. Bird flicked ash onto the sidewalk. "He's a good kid," she said eventually. "Smarter than most, and too polite for this place." I smiled sadly. "He's always been kind." "Yeah, well, kindness doesn't keep you dry when it rains." I looked at her. There was something in her voice. A weight. "How do you know him?" I asked gently. She laughed, bitter and short. "He stopped some guy from grabbing my bag in an alley. Didn't even think, just stepped in." I was screaming. Everyone else just walked past. That didn't surprise me. He'd always had a protective streak. Even when he was little, he'd step between ants and my vacuum cleaner. He told me I reminded him of someone who survived something. Bird said, eyes distant. Didn't say what, but I could tell he knew. "You know," I nodded. "He's not just here because he's rebelling." She continued. "He's looking for something." What a place that doesn't feel like a trap. That hit me harder than I expected. Because she wasn't talking about city streets or buildings. She meant me. He'd left because home felt like a trap. Bird glanced at me, then crushed the cigarette beneath her shoe. "He's not mad at you. Just disappointed." "I deserve that," I said. She studied me for a long moment. "Maybe. But you showed up. Most don't." I wanted to ask more, but I could feel the edge of the moment, like any pressure might snap it. Instead, I handed her a folded slip of paper. "My number. In case you see him again." She took it. "If he lets me," she said. And then she was gone, disappearing into a crowd of city kids like smoke and wind. I sat there another hour watching the mural. A mother surrounded by strangers in a city she didn't belong to, waiting for a son she no longer fully understood. But I wasn't broken. Not completely. Because now I knew something I didn't before. Liam hadn't run from me. He'd run from what he thought I was. And if I wanted him to come back, to really come back, I had to show him something different. Something true. That night, I checked into a motel near the train lot. The sheets were scratchy, the walls too thin. But I didn't mind. I unpacked my laptop and opened a blank document. Then slowly, I started writing him a letter. A new one. Not a plea. Not an apology. Just a story. The story of him. Of who he was before the hurt. Of who I was before the fear. And who we might still become if we both decided to keep trying. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I saw him again. Not face to face, not close enough to speak, but close enough to feel. I was walking out of a quiet corner bookstore. One of those forgotten places that still smelled like glue dust and paperbacks nobody had touched in decades. I'd been killing time, looking through poetry he used to read in middle school, pretending I was just browsing, pretending I wasn't hoping for a glimpse of someone. And then, there he was, across the street, leaning against a rusted post near a boarded-up hardware store, half his face in shadow, hoodie pulled low. But I knew. You always know your own child. He didn't approach, didn't wave, didn't even shift his weight. He just watched me. Time slowed. In the span of a breath, I imagined running to him, crossing the street, throwing my arms around him, whispering, "I've missed you," over and over until I believed I could erase the distance between us. But I didn't move, because somewhere deep inside I knew this moment wasn't for reunion, it was for trust. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done as a mother. I turned away, clutched the bag of books to my chest, and walked. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, but because he needed me not to. Back at the motel, my hands were shaking. I set the books down carefully like they were made of glass. I tried to read one of them, a slim novel about a boy who lived in silence until music found him, but the words swam. Instead, I paced. From the window to the door. From the desk to the nightstand. He'd been there, watching me. Why was he afraid I'd changed too much? Or worse, that I hadn't changed at all? I stepped out to grab a drink from the vending machine in the motel lobby. The hallway smelled like stale coffee and carpet cleaner. When I returned 10 minutes later, something had changed. There, sitting quietly on the nightstand, was a piece of folded paper. No name, no envelope, just sitting there waiting. I approached like it was a wild animal that might bolt. Unfolded it slowly. His handwriting. "You didn't look back. Thank you." Just that. 7 words. But I had to sit down. Because my knees had forgotten how to hold me. He'd followed me. He'd been close. Close enough to leave a note. Close enough to watch me without fear. And most importantly, close enough to acknowledge me without retreating. That meant something. It meant we were beginning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because I was full. Full of hope. Full of grief. Full of all the things I had wanted to say for months and never did. So I pulled out the letter I'd been working on, the one I had started days ago. It had become more than a letter. It was now a story. The story of him. I'd written about his birth, the way he cried until they placed him on my chest. I wrote about the time he got a cut on his knee and refused to let anyone but me clean it. About how he used to narrate his dreams at breakfast. How his eyes always went glassy when he felt things he didn't know how to name. And then I told the truth. The real truth. That I hadn't seen him in years, even though he'd been right in front of me. That I'd let my exhaustion become the language of our home. That somewhere along the way, I stopped being a mother and started being a manager. And that I was sorry. For all of it. The next morning, I printed the story. 12 pages double-spaced, folded them into a plain envelope. Then I went back to the mural wall. The phoenix was still there, wings stretched across brick like stained glass. A bird who burned and returned. I sat on the same bench, let the city pass around me, and waited. It took nearly 3 hours for Bird to show up. Same dark hoodie, same silver hair. This time, a limp in her right leg. A bruise under her chin she tried to hide with makeup. "You look worse," I said gently. She smiled crooked but not unkind. So do you. Fair enough. I handed her the envelope. This is for him, I said. She weighed it in her hands like it might explode. I'm not making promises, she said. I'm not asking for any. She tucked it into her coat. He might not even read it. I think he will. She looked at me for a moment, squinting like she was trying to decide something. You're not like the others. I've made just as many mistakes. Yeah, she said, standing. But you're trying to clean them up. She turned and walked off before I could reply. That evening, I sat in my room with a book I wasn't reading, listening to the wind scrape against the motel window. It wasn't silence anymore. It was waiting. 3 days passed. I tried not to let it crush me. I took long walks, wrote more letters I didn't send, bought another poetry book, one I remembered reading aloud to him when he was 10, the kind with animals who talked in metaphors. And then, on the 4th morning, it happened. I opened the door to find a small wrapped package on the concrete step. Brown paper, taped with care. Inside, the graphic novel I'd bought for him earlier that week, the one from our shared past. My letter now annotated in the margins, his pencil scribbles like breadcrumbs. A new letter, from him. The envelope was thin, but inside it were words that felt like years in the making. I remember more than you think. I just needed to know you did too. I'm not ready to come home, but I'm ready to let you in. Slowly. Liam. I cried so hard I thought my lungs might burst, not because it was fixed, not because it was over, but because he was still there, still trying, still reaching out even in baby steps with hands that had once been too hurt to move at all. Later that night, I opened the letter again and read his annotations. Next to a paragraph where I described his first piano recital he had written, I wasn't scared. I was proud. You looked terrified. And beside a line about our last fight before he left, you were right about me failing math, but I needed you to care why. That's what it all came down to. He needed me to care why, not just about the outcomes, not just about the grades or the rules or the silence, but about him. Sometimes redemption comes in waves, sometimes in lightning, and sometimes it comes folded in brown paper, one pencil line at a time. It was a gray Thursday when I saw him again, truly saw him, not just across the street or through another person's eyes, but close enough to hear the shift in his breath, close enough to see the hesitation in his jaw. He met me at a park bench in the edge of the city, one I'd sat at every morning for 2 weeks, just in case. I didn't expect it. I hadn't texted. I hadn't begged. I had simply waited, showed up with quiet consistency. And that day, when I looked up from the paperback I was pretending to read, there he was. He walked up slowly, as if testing the ground beneath each step. His backpack looked heavier, or maybe he did. His hoodie was the same. His eyes weren't. I smiled. Didn't speak. He sat down. Did you read it? I asked softly. He nodded. 3 times. And Liam didn't answer immediately. He just pulled out a folded sheet of paper from his coat pocket and handed it to me. No envelope, no grand presentation, just a piece of lined paper written in pencil. I unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It was a list. Rules if you want to be part of my life again. No fake apologies. Don't interrupt me when I talk, even if I say something you don't like. Don't make promises you won't keep. Ask me what I want, not what you think I should want. If I say I need space, give it to me. Don't say you understand unless you really do. Don't fix me, just listen. If you ever use guilt to get your way again, I'm gone. Let me be a person, not just your son. No talking about when you come home. That's my call. I finished reading. Took a long breath. I can do this, I said. No, he corrected. You can try. That's different. I looked at him. I'll try. Every day. Liam leaned back, arms crossed. Okay. Not forgiveness. Not a hug. Not even a smile. But he stayed. We sat there in silence for nearly an hour, watching pigeons fight over crumbs, watching the clouds smear across the sky, watching everything except each other. It wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Eventually I asked, "Where have you been sleeping?" He shrugged. "Here and there. Youth co-op some nights. Jenna's couch once. Parks, mostly." My heart clenched, but I didn't press. "I can get you a place," I said quietly. "No pressure, no expectation. Just a room paid up for a month. You choose if or when I visit." Liam looked at me sharp, cautious. "Not a trap. Not a trap." That evening we walked to a modest motel just outside downtown. He checked the room himself, looked in the drawers, tested the lock on the window. I gave him a prepaid card, a list of local counseling services, and my number on a sticky note, even though I knew he had it memorized. I didn't hug him, didn't ask for a selfie, didn't even cry. I just stood in the doorway and said, "If you want me to come tomorrow, leave the blinds open." He didn't say yes, didn't say no. He just closed the door gently. The next morning, the blinds were open. We didn't have deep talks right away. Mostly we shared meals. I brought books. He taught me how to play a card game he'd learned from other teens. I didn't ask too many questions. When he got quiet, I let the silence be. One day we sat in a diner and he asked, "Why now? Why are you doing this now?" I looked at him. "Because I finally realized I'd rather be uncomfortable and honest with you than comfortable and distant from you." He chewed that for a while. Then, "Took you long enough." Sometimes his rules were hard. There were moments when I wanted to say something maternal, something heavy with warning or worry or my own broken patterns. But I held my tongue. Because love, real love, isn't about being right. It's about being present. After a week, he let me come to therapy with him. Family counseling. Brutal. Honest. Stripped bare. We talked about the year after his dad died, how I became emotionally absent even while physically there. He said I made grief a prison and told him it was for his own safety. He wasn't wrong. I cried. He didn't. Not then. But he held the tissue box out to me, and that meant more than tears. In our third session, he said, "I didn't want to stop loving you. I just didn't know how anymore." I broke. Fully. But I didn't apologize the way I used to. I didn't try to fix it. I just said, "Thank you for telling me." That's when he cried. We're not whole yet. We may never be. But now we share something we never had before: choice. He chooses when we talk. I choose when to listen without fear. We choose each other on purpose, not out of obligation. And every time I see him open that motel door or text me a single word, "coffee," I know we're writing a new story, one where love doesn't control, it invites. The walls in the counseling office were painted a pale green. Soft, muted, intentionally inoffensive. The kind of color that tried to say, "It's safe here," without saying anything at all. There was a ticking clock on the far wall. I counted the spaces between each second like a metronome for my thoughts. Tick. Breathe. Tick. Don't speak. Tick. Let him go first. Liam sat on the far end of the couch. Arms crossed, legs stretched out back, barely grazing the cushion behind him. Like the seat was made of glass and he wasn't sure if it would hold. Between us sat Dr. Clark. Late 50s, warm voice, buzzed salt and pepper hair. No clipboard. Just a single brown leather notebook. The notebook was everything. Dr. Clark didn't ask us to start with pleasantries. He wasn't that kind of counselor. Instead, he opened the notebook, flipped to a page I couldn't see, and asked one question. "What's something you've never said to each other but always wanted to?" Liam didn't even flinch. He spoke before I could. "I always felt like a guest in our house," he said. "Not a son. Just someone who wasn't supposed to disturb the peace." I didn't speak. My mouth felt like chalk. He turned slightly toward me. Even when I was small, I felt it. Like I had to behave, not because it was right, but because you couldn't handle me if I didn't. I wanted to say that wasn't true, but I didn't. Because I remembered. The way I'd close doors with a bit too much force. The way I'd sigh before answering his questions. The way I'd collapse into silence whenever I felt overwhelmed, which after his father died was almost daily. That kind of emotional absence doesn't always look like abuse. Sometimes it just looks like distance. And kids, they feel distance, like burns. Dr. Clark made a note in his book, then looked at me. Dana. I blinked. What had I always wanted to say? I tried to find a sentence. But what came out was an entire paragraph. I thought if I showed you how to survive, you'd understand it was love, I said slowly. But I think I taught you to endure pain instead, and called that strength. Liam didn't look at me, but his breath shifted. After your father passed, I shut down. I tried to keep everything organized, clean, structured like that would stop the chaos from leaking in. But all it did was keep you out. Silence. I'm sorry I made home feel like a museum instead of a place to live. Still silence. But then a quiet sound. A scribble. Liam had pulled a pencil from his pocket and was writing something in his own notebook. I didn't try to see. I'd learned that lesson. Let him have his own space. Our sessions became ritual. Every Monday and Thursday, same room, same seats, same coffee mug in Dr. Clark's hand. Each time we opened a little more. One week, Liam brought up the day he first skipped school. I sat in the woods near the train tracks, he said. Wasn't trying to run away yet. Just needed to hear myself think. I asked, why didn't you tell me you were struggling? He laughed. You were always struggling louder. It was honest. And it hurt. But I nodded. Fair. Another session, Dr. Clark asked us to switch roles, to speak as if we were each other. Liam went first. He sat up straighter, cleared his throat, and said in a soft, strained voice, I'm Dana. I don't cry where people can see. I make lists when I'm afraid. I use silence like armor. But deep down, I'm terrified that if anyone really knows me, they'll leave, so I leave first. My mouth opened and closed. Then it was my turn. I took a breath and looked him in the eye. I'm Liam. I feel everything all the time and don't know how to shut it off. I make jokes when I'm drowning. I want someone to ask what I really need and not be scared of the answer. When I finished, he smiled. Small. Real. Okay, he said. You win. The biggest shift came during a session when Dr. Clark brought out a stack of blank index cards. He handed 5 to each of us. Write down 5 moments, he said. 1 per card. Times where you felt either most connected or most invisible. No explanations. Just the memory. We wrote in silence. I wrote watching him sleep the night he came home from the hospital. Hearing him call me Mom again after a week of silence. The first time he asked, "Are you okay?" when I wasn't. Seeing the missing persons poster hung up by someone I didn't know. His text, "Coffee." Liam passed his stack to me. I did the same. His cards read, "You holding my hand at Dad's funeral. When you made lasagna and remembered I hated ricotta, so you used cheddar instead. The time I ran away and came back. And you didn't ask where I'd been, just hugged me. Watching you cry behind the laundry room door, I never said anything. I should've. Your letter, the long one. We didn't read them out loud, but we sat with them. 2 people who'd finally named the moments that shaped them. Later that week, Dr. Clark pulled me aside after Liam had left early. He's healing, he said simply. I know, I whispered. But what about me? He didn't answer immediately. Then, you both are. But the question is, are you willing to be someone new for the version of Liam that's growing now? Not the one you remember? Not the one you lost? The now version. I nodded. Because that was the only version that mattered. That evening, I opened my own notebook, the one I'd started on day 1, and began a new page. Things I never learned from my own mother. That softness and strength aren't opposites. That apologies aren't weakness. That parenting means unlearning too. That silence can be violence. That love is more than just showing up. It's changing for someone else's safety. The next time I saw Liam, I asked, "What do you need from me today?" He thought about it. "Can we just hang out? No questions. Maybe a movie." "Your pick," I said. He smirked. "You're gonna regret that." We watched a sci-fi comedy with ridiculous special effects and over-the-top explosions. He laughed so hard tears came out. And I didn't see the boy I'd lost. I saw the young man who was choosing to return, not because he had to, but because I finally made it safe to. And somewhere in Dr. Clark's notebook I knew. He had already written breakthrough. It was raining the night I wrote the last letter. Not a soft, romantic rain, but a hard, slanted, windshield smearing kind of rain. The kind that made the gutters swell and the streetlights shimmer like wet ghosts. Liam had just left after dinner. We'd spent the evening playing cards, eating too much takeout, and laughing more than I thought we knew how to. He'd hugged me before walking out the door, not a long hug, not one of those mother-son embrace-the-world kind, but warm, intentional. It felt like the end of something, or maybe the beginning of something else. So I sat at the little motel desk with my tea growing cold and wrote what I never thought I'd need to write again. One last letter. Dear Liam, you're probably wondering why I'm still writing letters when we've been talking face to face for weeks now. It's a fair question. I think part of me still believes that paper gives truth a place to land, a place it can't run from. Words stick on paper. They can't be undone by a sigh or an eye roll or walking out of a room. They stay. They sit with you. They demand to be read slowly. And tonight I need to say things that deserve that kind of weight. I looked up from the page, watching the rain streak down the motel window like veins. In the distance, a siren wailed, not urgent, just tired, like the city itself was worn down. I turned back to my writing. It's been strange watching you reassemble yourself in pieces. Not like a broken thing being glued back together, no. More like a puzzle that was always whole, but just scattered by a strong wind. I see the way you breathe more deeply now, the way you lean into silence like it's not trying to punish you anymore. I've watched you let joy slip in even when you're not looking. Do you know what that does to a mother? It shatters her. In the best way. It unbuilds everything she thought she was protecting and replaces it with hope. You're still cautious. I see it. You check exits in restaurants. You flinch when someone raises their voice even if it's just across the street. You shrink a little when kindness comes too fast, but you don't run. And that's something. That's everything. I paused, took a sip of the now cold tea, and kept writing. There's something I never told you about your father. After he died, I used to lie awake at night replaying old conversations, trying to remember the exact sound of his laugh. Wondering if I'd been enough for him, if I'd said the right things, held his hand tightly enough in those final hours. I realized years later that I was trying to fix his memory by changing the way I remembered it, and in doing that, I started reshaping you too. I tried to mold you into someone I could protect better, someone less vulnerable, someone easier to manage. But you were never meant to be easy. You were meant to be you. And I'm finally letting go of the idea that I ever needed to control your journey to love you fully. It was midnight now. The rain had softened into a whisper against the glass. Somewhere down the street, a car started, then stopped again. The motel's neon sign buzzed through the curtains, blinking like a tired heartbeat. I used to fear your pain, Liam. Not because I didn't think you could handle it, but because I didn't know how to sit beside it without trying to fix it. I know now that presence is more powerful than solution, that just being here matters more than having the answers. So here I am. No answers, no plans, just love. And that's the most honest thing I've ever written. There was more, so much more. I flipped to a second page. I don't know where your path leads. Maybe you'll stay here a while. Maybe you'll move 3 cities away again. Maybe you'll become someone I barely recognize, but in the best possible way. Someone who sings in the car again. Someone who trusts slow mornings and soft people. Whatever happens, this is the truth. You do not owe me closeness. You do not owe me comfort. You owe yourself a life that doesn't make you shrink. And if I'm lucky, I'll get to witness it. I stared at the words for a long time. They didn't feel poetic. They felt true. The next morning, I folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. I walked to the motel's front desk and asked the clerk to deliver it to room 108, Liam's room, sometime that afternoon. I didn't text him about it. Didn't knock on his door. I just waited. Not for thanks. Not for a response. Just for the act of release. Later that evening, I got a knock at my door. I opened it to find Liam standing there holding the letter in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other. "I thought we could make lasagna," he said. I blinked. "You hate ricotta." He smirked. I bought cheddar. We cooked in near silence, but it wasn't heavy. It was domestic. Familiar. He chopped tomatoes like a pro. I grated cheese. We bickered briefly about noodle layering techniques. The oven filled the motel room with warmth I hadn't felt in years. When the timer beeped, we sat on the floor, plates in hand. Halfway through his meal, Liam looked at me and said, "That was a good letter." "Yeah." He nodded. Felt like a hug I could read. I didn't reply right away. Then I meant every word. He took another bite, chewed slowly. Then out of nowhere he said, "I think I'm ready." For what, he didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a small envelope from his hoodie pocket and slid it across the floor to me. I opened it. Inside was a house key. I stared. "Is this—" He nodded. "I want to come home. Not forever. Just maybe a little while. Just until I find my own place again, but on my terms." I nodded. My throat ached too much to speak. He reached for the TV remote. "Can we watch something dumb?" I laughed through tears. I was about to suggest the same. We fell asleep that night, not on a train platform or a dramatic stage of reunion, but on a motel carpet surrounded by empty plates and half-watched sitcoms. And it was perfect. In the weeks that followed, Liam moved in. Not back into the life we had before, but into something new. We painted his room a darker color. He chose charcoal. Said it calmed him. We went grocery shopping and he picked out things I'd never think to buy: plant-based snacks, neon drinks, frozen dumplings. He started cooking. Little things, then bigger meals. He read again. Slowly. Thoughtfully. Sometimes we still went to counseling. Sometimes we just sat in silence. And once, just once, he asked me to read the letter out loud. He listened to every word without interrupting. When I finished, he said nothing, just came over and leaned his head against my shoulder. And we stayed that way until the room grew dark. It's strange. The worst thing that ever happened to me wasn't losing my son. It was realizing I'd lost myself long before he ever left. But in finding him, I found the courage to come back to myself too. The first real test came at the dinner table. Not during therapy. Not in the slow afternoons filled with cautious conversations or the quiet motel nights. But at our old wooden table, the one Liam had once carved his initials into when he was 10. We were home now. And home, as I learned, is where ghosts like to show up. Especially at dinner. I had spent the whole day preparing a meal. I didn't mean to go overboard, it just happened. Meatloaf the way he liked it when he was a kid. Mashed potatoes, roasted carrots, a peach cobbler cooling by the window. It was nostalgic. Comforting. Too comforting, maybe. I was trying to conjure a version of the past that felt like safety. When Liam walked in, he froze at the sight of the spread. His face didn't wrinkle in anger. It didn't drop in sadness. But it stilled. And in that stillness, I saw it, the test. "You okay?" I asked casually. He gave a small smile. "Yeah, just a lot." He sat down slowly, picking up his fork like it weighed more than it should. We started eating in silence. My hands moved automatically, but my brain was on fire. Should I have done something simpler? Should I not have tried to go back? About 3 bites in, he set his fork down. I think I need to say something, he said. I set mine down too. Go ahead. I know you meant this as a nice gesture. And it is. But. He looked up at me, and for the first time in days, his eyes were unsure. But this feels like we're pretending. I held his gaze. Pretending how? Like nothing happened. Like I didn't leave. Like things didn't fall apart. This food, this setup, it's from a version of us that doesn't exist anymore. It's good, but it's not real. I nodded slow. You're right. He blinked. I was trying to comfort you with a memory, but I think I was comforting myself. He exhaled. That's fair. I didn't mean to erase the hard stuff. I know. We sat in the truth for a moment. Let it settle on the table between us. Then he picked up his fork again. But I am going to eat this cobbler. Just so we're clear. I laughed, full unguarded. Good. Because I made way too much. Later that evening, we cleaned up together. It wasn't choreographed like some heartwarming commercial. We bumped into each other. I dropped a glass. He cursed when he splashed himself with soapy water. It was awkward. It was human. It was ours. And that made it sacred. That night, while he showered, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine and a book I couldn't bring myself to read. The wind had picked up, and a soft thunder rumbled somewhere far away. I heard the screen door creak. Liam came out in pajama pants and a hoodie. Barefoot as always. He sat next to me and pulled his knees up to his chest. I've been thinking, he said. Uh-oh. He gave me a sideways glance. Funny. I waited. I don't think I want to go back to school, he said finally. At least not yet. I nodded. Okay. You're not going to push me. I asked you to tell me what you need. That includes what you don't. He looked relieved, but skeptical. You really mean that I really do? He looked out at the sky. I want to get a job. Something small. A coffee shop or bookstore or, I don't know. Just something I choose. I think that's a great idea. Silence. Then you'd be okay with that. I'd be proud of that. He was quiet again, but this time it was the silence of peace, not withdrawal. 2 days later, he applied at 3 local spots. One rejected him outright. Another said they'd call and didn't. The third, a quiet, slightly cluttered used bookstore downtown, called him back. I drove him to the interview, but I stayed in the car. Watched from a distance. He walked out 40 minutes later holding a paper cup and wearing a crooked smile. I start Monday, he said. I teared up. They're lucky to have you. He rolled his eyes but didn't deny the compliment. Over the next week, something began to shift. Liam came home smelling like dust and paperbacks. He told me about quirky customers and strange requests. He started making jokes again, real ones, not the dark deflecting kind. He was becoming. And I was learning not to stand in the way. One evening, we passed each other in the hallway. I said, "How was your day?" He said, "You really want to know?" "Yes." So we sat down and talked for 2 hours about a woman who tried to return a book from 1992, a coworker who practiced slam poetry during break, and how he'd started leaving little sticky notes inside random novels with quotes that meant something to him. He called it quiet graffiti. I called it proof he was alive again. A few nights later, I came home to find the dinner table bare but not empty. There was a single sheet of paper and a sandwich. Peanut butter and banana cut diagonally. My favorite. The note said, "You didn't ask for this. I just wanted to say thanks for letting things be messy and real. I'm still figuring out who I am, but for the first time, I want to." That night, I cried alone, but not out of grief. Out of gratitude. In one of our later sessions with Dr. Clark, he said something that stuck with me. Reconnection isn't about returning to what you had, it's about creating something new with what's left. What Liam and I had now wasn't the same as before. It was better. Not always easier, not tied in a bow, but it was true. One day at lunch, he asked me, "Do you still write letters?" I smiled. "Sometimes." "Do you still write to me?" "I do." He nodded, thoughtful. "Will you ever stop? Only if you ask me to?" He shook his head. "Don't. Even if I never read them. I won't." We clinked our glasses of lemonade like a secret toast. And that night, when I sat down at my desk again, I opened a new page. Not to write a goodbye, but a continuation. Because the truth is, some stories don't end with the return. Some stories begin at the dinner table. I never expected a used bookstore to become the place where my son's soul started blooming again. But there it was, tucked between creaky floors, endless shelves, and a front window always half fogged with breath and sun. Liam worked the afternoon shift, Tuesdays to Saturdays. He preferred it that way. Mornings were still too raw, too quiet. Afternoons gave him noise, motion, and just enough strangers to make life feel new again. But what surprised me most were the sticky notes. It started small. One day he came home with a smudge of blue ink on his thumb and a strange look on his face, equal parts mischief and meaning. "I left something behind today," he said cryptically. "What kind of something?" He shrugged. "A thought. On paper." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. He just gave me that half smile he always wore when he didn't want to explain himself fully, like the punchline was sacred. The next day, he left early with a small yellow notepad in his back pocket. A week passed before I asked again. So I said one night over leftovers. "Sticky notes." He raised an eyebrow. "You've heard, I've seen. The woman at the counter, Maribel, showed me one. Said a customer found it inside a copy of the bell jar. It said, 'Even shadows need sunlight to exist.'" Liam blushed just slightly. "Yeah, that was mine. Where do you get them?" "The quotes I write, some I hear, some I just feel. And the customers, they don't always notice, but sometimes they come back and ask if they can keep them." I smiled. "You made a little kindness loop." He looked down at his plate, then back up at me. "It's the only kind of graffiti I've ever felt good about." From that moment on, I became obsessed. Not in a controlling way, but in awe, quiet admiration. I began to visit the bookstore once a week, never during his shift. I'd browse like any other customer, pick up books, and flip through the pages hoping to find one of Liam's quiet pieces of rebellion. Each note felt like a message in a bottle, part diary, part gift, part goodbye to a version of himself that no longer fit. Here are some I found. "You're not too late. You just haven't arrived yet. Grief doesn't ask for permission, but healing always knocks first. Your silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. The version of you that survived deserves a seat at the table." One day, a teenage girl stood 2 shelves over from me, crying quietly. She was holding a paperback copy of Persepolis, one of Liam's favorites. I watched as she pulled a note from the inside flap. She read it, cried harder, folded it carefully, and slid it into her wallet. She never noticed me, but I noticed everything. That's when I realized Liam wasn't just healing, he was guiding. Later that evening, I told him what I saw. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he nodded and said, "She looked like I used to feel. Invisible, but carrying everything." He sipped his tea. "Sometimes words left for strangers are the ones that heal us most." I asked him once if he kept a record of them. He shook his head. "I like not knowing where they end up. Isn't that hard? It used to be. But now, it feels like trust." "Trust in what?" "That they'll land where they're needed." I didn't respond, because sometimes the best thing a mother can do is let her son teach her. One day, I walked into the store and saw something new, a small corkboard by the front door, titled in Liam's handwriting, "Words We Keep." Pinned to it were returned sticky notes, ones that customers brought back and wanted to share. Others had copied his style and left their own. "You don't have to burn down the whole forest to escape it. Just step outside the tree line. You are more than who you were on your worst day." This page held me up when I was falling. Liam's movement, this quiet, anonymous revolution, had become a community. I think that's when I realized he wasn't lost anymore. Still growing, yes. Still healing always. But lost. Not even close. Back home, I found myself writing too. Not sticky notes, but letters to myself. Letters that began with things like, "Dear Dana, you did your best with the tools you had." Or, "Today, you listened more than you corrected." That's growth. Healing, I discovered, is contagious. When one person lights a match inside their darkness, it often sparks something nearby. Liam's light was starting to reach me too. One rainy Thursday, I came home to find a sticky note on my mirror, written in green ink. "You were never a bad mother. You were just scared, and tired, and doing the impossible." I knew instantly that Liam had written it. He didn't sign it, didn't bring it up at dinner. But when I looked across the table that night and whispered, "Thank you," he simply said, "I meant it." A few weeks later, the bookstore held a small poetry night. Local artists. Open mic. Liam invited me. "I'm not reading," he warned, "but I helped organize it." So I came. I sat in the back, watched him move among people like he belonged again. He clapped the loudest, hugged the nervous readers, refilled the tea station twice. At the end of the night, Maribel stepped up to the mic. "I want to thank Liam," she said, "for turning this place into a sanctuary." Applause. Then she added, "He probably won't read tonight, but he gave me something to read for him." She pulled a small yellow note from her pocket. "If you're still here, that means you chose to be. And maybe, just maybe, that's your quiet rebellion, surviving in a world that told you not to." The room was silent. Then came the thunder of hands. Tears. Nods. Liam ducked his head embarrassed, but his eyes glowed. That night, back at home, he sat beside me on the couch. "Why are people so kind?" he asked softly. "Because someone has to start," I said. "And sometimes, it's you." He smiled. "I didn't expect to be part of something again. You never stopped being part of me." He didn't reply, but he leaned his head on my shoulder, and I knew that said enough. In the drawer of my nightstand, I keep a box now. It's not locked. It's not labeled. But inside are every sticky note I've found, every letter he's written, every moment I didn't want to forget. I call it our quiet scrapbook, not of pictures, but of becoming, because some legacies aren't built on bloodlines or birthdays. Some are built on paper, folded, shared, and left behind like little lights in the dark. It wasn't dramatic. There were no violins, no slow-motion camera pans, no crowd holding its breath. It was just a Tuesday. Cloudy. Slight breeze. A faint hum of spring pollen in the air. We were at the farmer's market. Liam wanted tomatoes. Not just any tomatoes, he said, inspecting each one like it held a secret. The kind that smell like real ones, like Grandma's backyard. You know I did. We walked between stalls, surrounded by families, chatter the scent of fresh basil and baked bread. Liam wore his thrifted hoodie, paint splattered too big. His hair was longer now, not messy, just free. He tucked it behind his ears as he moved. I watched him. How he walked slower now. How his shoulders didn't curl forward anymore like he was waiting to be hit by the world. And then it happened. A man at the stall next to us shouted loudly, not angrily, just calling to someone across the row. His voice cracked like thunder. For months, that sound had been a trigger. I'd seen it a dozen times, Liam freezing mid-step, flinching slightly, his breath catching in the back of his throat. But this time, he blinked, turned his head, and just kept going. He didn't flinch. He didn't duck. He didn't disappear behind his eyes. He picked up a tomato, held it to his nose, smiled. "This one's it." I watched him, stunned. "Did you hear that guy yell?" I asked carefully. Liam nodded. "Yeah." No reaction. He shrugged. "Not this time." I didn't push. But inside, something opened in me, like the first warm breeze after a long locked winter. We bought the tomatoes, a loaf of sourdough, some honey from a local vendor. He carried the bags without asking, and on the walk back to the car he said, "I think I want to go to the mountains next week." I blinked. "Alone?" "No," he said. "With you." The mountains. They had history, good and bad. When Liam was 12, we used to go every summer, just the two of us. His father had passed, and those trips became our ritual. Campfires, marshmallows, stargazing through the car sunroof. But we hadn't been in years. Too many ghosts. Too many silences. So to hear him say that now, I'd love that, I said. We left the following Thursday. Packed light. Drove slow. Liam made a playlist, mostly indie stuff I didn't recognize. He pointed out clouds that looked like ships and told me which ones he'd ride if he could. At one point, he asked if he could drive for a stretch. I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because I hadn't let go like that in a long time. I handed him the keys. He drove like someone who respected the road. At the cabin, it rained the first night. We made grilled cheese, played cards. He taught me a new version of poker. I lost every hand and loved every second. Before bed, he stepped onto the porch and stared out at the trees. I followed. "Thinking big thoughts?" I asked. He shook his head. "Just listening." "To what?" "The quiet." We stood there shoulder to shoulder, letting the forest hum around us. He didn't flinch at the owl call, didn't shudder at a branch snapping in the wind. His body was still, not bracing, not scanning, just there. The next morning, we hiked a trail we hadn't touched since he was 13. It used to scare him, narrow, steep in places, the drop below dramatic. He led the way this time. At one point, he stopped and pointed. "You remember that tree?" I looked. "A wide pine with initials carved into it." "Yeah," I whispered. "You cried here once." "I remember." I braced myself, but he smiled. "I thought we were lost. You told me we weren't, but I didn't believe you." "You were right not to," I said. "I was lost. I just didn't want to admit it." He laughed. I knew it. Then he reached out and added a new carving, our initials side by side. No hearts, no promises, just truth. Back at the cabin, we sat by the fire. He roasted a marshmallow until it was charred and grinned like a kid when it slid off the stick. We talked about nothing and everything. And then, in the flicker of the firelight, he said, "You used to look at me like I might vanish." I turned to him. "Not anymore," he added. "Now you look at me like I might stay." I swallowed hard. "That's because I finally realized you were never the one who left." He tilted his head. "I left you," I said, "way before you ever ran away. I left when I stopped seeing you as your own person, when I tried to manage you instead of know you." Liam nodded. "I'm glad you came back." We sat in silence again. Then he said, "I don't flinch much anymore. I've noticed. It's weird. I still get anxious, still have bad days. But it's different. Like my body isn't constantly waiting for the sky to fall." "Do you know why?" He shrugged. "Maybe because someone finally stood next to me without trying to shield me from the rain. They just let me get wet and held my hand." I blinked away tears. "That someone was you," he added quietly. That night I couldn't sleep. Not from worry, from awe, from the weight of how far we'd come. I walked outside barefoot on the cold porch and looked up at the stars. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next disaster. I felt safe. The next morning, I found a sticky note on the bathroom mirror. This one was for me. Healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sighs, and sometimes it just doesn't flinch. I pressed it to my chest and let the silence say everything. When we returned home, something had shifted permanently. Liam still had therapy once a week. I still kept my journal. We still had boundaries. But the fear, the white-knuckle grip on hope had softened. He started volunteering at the bookstore's writing group. Started tutoring a teen who reminded him of himself. He didn't call it mentoring, just hanging out. But I saw it for what it was. Redemption. Service. Belonging. One evening, I asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't run away?" Liam looked up from his tea. "All the time," he said, "and I wouldn't be this version of me." "Do you like this version?" He smiled. "I'm learning to." And then, with a quiet certainty, he added, "I'm not running anymore. There's a drawer in my desk that's been full for years. It doesn't lock. It's not hidden. But no one ever opened it but me. Inside are letters, hundreds of them, all addressed to Liam. I started writing them when he was 11. At first, they were sweet little things like, "You asked if I believed in magic. I told you yes. You are the proof." Then came the harder ones. "I yelled today. I hate myself for it. You looked at me like I was a stranger." And eventually, they became silent screams on paper. Where did I go wrong? Why can't I reach you anymore? I never sent them. I never even read them out loud. They lived there, crumpled, stained, folded crooked from shaking hands. The drawer became a graveyard for every apology I didn't know how to give, and every truth I was afraid to face. Until now. Now it felt like time to open it, not alone. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I called Liam into my study. He hesitated at the door. "You're not in trouble," I said, smiling. He snorted. "Bit late for that, don't you think?" I patted the chair beside me and opened the drawer. "I've been writing you letters for over a decade," I said. "Want to read some?" His expression shifted from curiosity to confusion to caution. "I don't want to ruin anything," I added. "But I also don't want to hide anymore." He nodded slowly. "Let's read." We read in silence side by side, one by one. Some made him laugh, like the one where I described his 6-year-old logic for why cereal definitely counted as a vegetable. Others made him tear up, like the one where I confessed I felt like a failure every time I saw him flinch at my voice. But the one that made us both cry was just a single line. "If I could unzip my heart and hand it to you, maybe then you'd believe how sorry I am." He folded that one carefully. Didn't speak for a while. Then, "That's heavy." I nodded. I didn't know how else to say it. He looked up at me, eyes clear, voice even. "You don't have to say it anymore." That was the moment I realized forgiveness isn't always verbal. Sometimes it's a pause, a breath, a steady presence that doesn't walk away. He picked out a few letters and asked if he could keep them. Of course. He tucked them into his backpack like relics. Not to weaponize, not to throw in my face later, but to hold, to witness, to remember that once, even in the silence, I was trying. Later that night, I opened a fresh page in my journal and wrote, "Dear Liam, this is the first letter I'm writing, not in shame or regret, but in thanks. Thank you for surviving, for staying soft, for finding your way back not to who you were, but to who you were, always becoming. Love, Mom." The next morning, I slid that letter into the drawer. Not with the others. Alone. Not a part of the past, but the start of something new. A few days later, Liam came home from the bookstore carrying a small wooden box. "Found this at the thrift shelf," he said. "Thought you might like it. It was carved with delicate vines and had a little clasp. Inside it was lined with faded green velvet. "For your letters," he said. "The ones that matter." I choked up. "All of them matter." He shrugged. "Yeah, but some deserve sunlight." He placed the box on my desk. Gently. Reverently. "I'm going to write back," he said. I looked at him. "Really?" He grinned. "I've got some things to say too." That evening, I found a note tucked into my nightstand drawer, not sticky, not folded. Just there. "Dear Mom, you thought I wasn't listening all those years. I was. I just didn't know how to talk back. Thanks for waiting until I could. Love, Liam." I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was anxious, but because my heart was too full to rest. So I wrote. Not as penance, but as a way to build. In the weeks that followed, our letter exchange became a ritual. Sometimes silly. "Dear Liam, I ate the last muffin. I regret nothing. Dear Mom, you will regret it when I label the Tupperware wrong again." Sometimes serious. "Dear Liam, your silence used to scare me. Now it teaches me. Dear Mom, I still have bad dreams. But I don't wake up feeling alone anymore." It became our language. When words were too hard to say out loud, we wrote. When truth felt too fragile, we folded it on paper. One afternoon, I found a note inside a book I was reading, not from the bookstore, but from Liam. "You're not just a better mom. You're a braver one." I cried. Then wrote back. "You're not just a better son. You're the reason I found my voice again." That spring, we hosted a writing night at the bookstore together. It wasn't formal. No mics, no pressure. Just paper pens and a box where people could drop anonymous letters they never sent. At the end of the night, we read some, only the ones people marked with a red dot. Most were heartbreaking. "Dear Dad, I needed you to choose me. Dear me, I forgive you for surviving. Dear Mom, I never hated you. I hated feeling invisible." People cried, hugged, sat quietly with strangers. And somehow, through all that vulnerability, the room felt safer than church. After everyone left, Liam turned to me and said, "I used to think letters were just for people who couldn't speak." I raised an eyebrow. And now I know. Letters are for people who refuse to stay silent. I took his hand. I'm glad we didn't. Back at home, the drawer is still there, still full. But it no longer feels like a graveyard. It feels like a garden. Messy. Overgrown in places, but alive. Because love, the kind that survives grief and silence and everything in between, is written not in perfection, but in persistence. And now, when I write to Liam, I don't write out of desperation. I write because we built something. And it speaks. It didn't happen in a moment meant for meaning. Not during a hug. Not over a letter. Not at a birthday or some cinematic breakthrough. It happened in the kitchen. Over spilled flour. We were making bread, Liam's idea. He'd been experimenting with baking, said it helped him stay grounded. I just liked being invited in. I was measuring out the flour, already misreading the ratio, when he reached across me to grab a towel and knock the bowl clean off the counter. Flour everywhere. It covered the stove, the floor, the dog, my pants. We both froze. And then he laughed. Really laughed. Loud and light and full of the kind of joy that's only possible when something inside you no longer fears collapse. "Oh my God, Mom, you're covered." I didn't react right away. Not to the mess. Not to the laughter. Just to the word. Mom. He hadn't said it in over 3 years. He used to call me Dana, especially during the rough months. Then it became just silence. Then slowly small acknowledgments. "Hey, you. Can you pass that?" But this time, he said it without thinking, without guarding himself. Just Mom. And in that moment, I felt something inside me unclench. Not relief, not victory. Just peace. He kept laughing, grabbed the broom, swept the flour into messy piles while I just stood there stunned and smiling. "You good?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, more than good." He caught my eyes, narrowed his. "Wait, was it the flour? Or—" I bit my lip. "You called me Mom." He blinked, then grinned sheepishly. "Did I?" "You did." "Well," he said, half joking, "don't get used to it. Might have been the sugar rush." But I could tell. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't performative. It was earned. Later that night, he left another sticky note on my nightstand. This one didn't have a quote. Just 2 words written in the smallest, neatest script: "Welcome back." The next few weeks were full of small, quiet victories. He let me braid his hair one evening, something we hadn't done since he was a child. We planted tomatoes in the backyard and he gave each plant a name. One was called Sylvia. One was called "Don't Die Again, Please." He laughed more. He napped on the couch and didn't startle when I opened the fridge. He let me hug him, not always, not long, but enough. And he called me Mom 3 more times. Once when asking for socks. Once when saying goodbye. And once just before falling asleep on the porch, "Goodnight, Mom." I whispered it back like a prayer. I started writing a new kind of letter. Not the kind I tucked away in drawers, but ones I read aloud. Sometimes at dinner. Sometimes while we folded laundry. Like this one: "Dear Liam. Watching you laugh today was like watching the sun come back after years of clouds. I used to wonder if I'd ever get to meet this version of you, softer, funnier, bolder. Thank you for letting me." He didn't always respond. But once after I read one, he got up, walked to the fridge, scribbled something on a sticky note, and handed it to me. I'm not a miracle. Just a garden that finally got rain. I framed it. We began hosting letter nights at the bookstore every other Friday. People came with journals, notebooks, or nothing at all. They left with full hearts, tear-stained cheeks, and pockets filled with words. One woman stood up once and said, "I came here angry at my daughter. I'm leaving here ready to ask her to write me." Another man left a letter in the anonymous bin: "Dear son, if I ever made you feel like my love had conditions, I was wrong. You were always the answer. I just didn't know the question." Liam read that one aloud. His voice trembled, not from pain but from recognition. On the anniversary of his father's passing, we didn't do anything grand. Just sat on the porch, shared a slice of pie. Liam lit a candle and said, "He would have liked the bookstore." I nodded. "He would have liked you now, too." Liam paused, then asked, "Do you—" It stunned me. "You think I wouldn't? I don't know." This version of me, the one who doesn't flinch, who calls things out, who doesn't pretend I wasn't sure if you'd love him. I reached for his hand. "I don't just love you now. I respect you now. That's the difference." He looked at me, really looked, and said, "Thanks, Mom." That night I couldn't sleep. Not out of worry, but because my heart was finally full in the right way. Not from control, not from fear, but from connection, from truth. From hearing Mom and knowing it meant something real again. In the end, it wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about fixing everything. It was about staying long enough for the pain to become something else, not bitterness, not blame, but understanding. If you had told me a year ago that we'd be here, I would have said no. No way. Not us. Too much damage. Too many silences. But we made it. Sticky note by sticky note. Step by shaky step. And now when he says Mom, it no longer feels like a memory. It feels like home. Slow, emotional fade out. To anyone out there carrying silence in place of forgiveness, to anyone who thinks the distance can't be closed, I'm here to say, sometimes love doesn't roar. Sometimes it knocks quietly, waits, leaves a note, and when you're finally ready to open the door, it calls you Mom. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If you've ever lost someone emotionally and found them again, or if you're still waiting to share your story in the comments, and if this story meant something to you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us here at Grace's Truth, where every story is a chance to begin again.